Hey, what is up, family? So today during our live, mom came on and asked the question of like, how do I help my son maintain his confidence and his identity when he's being corrected more frequently than the girls in his space? And so here's some of the things that I would offer as tips that I talked about during the live is one, we got to separate the behavior from his identity. We can't have our boys thinking, hey, I am the problem. Instead, we have to help them to understand, like, hey, you may have made a mistake. Ultimately, you also want to just make sure that the language itself actually protects the identity of that young person still while addressing the accountability. So instead of, why do you keep getting in trouble? You might want to try like, tell me what happened from your perspective, or what do you think the teacher was hoping would happen? Or what part of would you want to handle differently next time? Because this actually helps the young person, our scholars, our young kings, see the behavior as something that they can adjust to, not something that defines who they are. Secondly, helping him to actually decode the situation. Asking him good questions that helps him to build interpretation is also important. So questions like, what do you think the expectation was in that moment? Or what do you think that teacher needed? What did mommy need? What did dad need? Having him to understand that is also important because now it builds the social awareness without the shaming. Teaching him the difference between impact and intention. And so I know so many of us, so many boys get frustrated because they're like, well, that's not what I meant. I said this and now it's misinterpreted. So now we have to actually help him to develop clarifying intentions. So maybe you work with him on, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, just naming that, or I had a question, or I didn't understand the directions, or I thought I was helping, right? And so those actually help boys to advocate for themselves respectfully. And then we have like, how do we affirm his strengths outside of the situation? And so sometimes the feedback that a boy hears is corrected. And so he then may internalize that something is wrong with him because sometimes that's what we interpret. So we have to have a balance of naming what is happening in the moment, why we're correcting it, and also surfacing strength. And so it might be like, I see how curious you are. You care about fairness. You have some strong ideas, or you want to understand, right? So those qualities help to lead the correction, but also amplify and lift up the leadership traits. And so I would also say helping him to actually develop what we call pause skills. So we can be reactive. We can find ourselves like, rah, 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 right? And so how do we actually teach him small regulation skills like I'm gonna pause before responding? Because sometimes that's what saves us in relationships, right? Or having him take a breath, like full belly breath, full belly. And sometimes you got to hold it because that allows the oxygen to go to the top of the crown, right? In order for him to rate, like, oh, okay, this, I have choice. I have agency in this moment. I can breathe through it. Asking him to raise his hand instead of calling out, writing the thought down, asking for clarification. And sometimes we need to help young boys and some of our young men be able to know that there is a way to actually express themselves. And even if they don't feel heard in the space that they're being harmed, that they do have track of what's going on and that we can teach them how we then sit with them and advocate. Because when you actually partner with teachers, then you show our boys how to advocate for themselves in those spaces. And so maybe it's about modeling for our boys like this whole framing. I want to support my son and understanding classroom expectations. I've noticed he seems to be receiving a lot of correction. I would love to understand what success looks like in your classroom so we can reinforce it at home. This frames collaboration, but it also gets the intention named in the space of how you are actually one, naming the behavior, and two, also creating clarity so that it does not leave anything vague. And that is going to be very helpful for him. And ultimately, two more things. One is, how do you monitor the emotional impact that happens with some of our boys? So sometimes we got to ask the question. It can't be like, how are you doing? How was your day? But how are you feeling about school lately? Or do you feel like your teachers understand you? Or share with me a little bit more about how do you know how your teachers are feeling? When do you feel most confident in class and when do you feel most frustrated? And is there a way I can help you? And so that actually helps us to listen for patterns. And also, when there's frequent correction that actually is impacting his sense of confidence, his sense of self, we can actually balance it with encouragement. And finally, we have to reinforce that he is capable. He is smart. He is absolutely dope at who he is. He's immensely uniquely qualified to be in the skin he's in. And so instead of us letting boys just say, hey, school isn't for me, how do we help him with the reframe? Learning how to navigate the different expectations is part of growing. Son, I love you. Or you are capable of being successful. You've done it before. You will do it again. Or, you know what? We're going to figure this thing out here together. And so that helps him to grow the confidence when the challenge is framed as part of skill building, because that is what seven figure, eight figure, and nine figure folks do. We actually work to reframe in order for us to rise together and fail forward. So I hope those help. And we're going to continue to do that good and great work. And I hope that that sends you some love and light. You take care.